the big deal happened for the Eagles the first time, it was wonderful. I mean, it was what I'd always wanted. It's what I'd lived my whole life for, and worked for and prepared for. But you're never prepared for it, really. I mean, it scares the hell out of people.
In 1980, paramedics rushed to Don Henley's home, and what they found was truly chilling. It was the kind of scene people never forgot. As a founding member of the Eagles, Don Henley helped build one of the most legendary and successful bands in American music history. But while the band was making hits and living the dream, there was serious drama happening behind the scenes, and Don's personal life had its own dark twists too. Don chased music from his high school days, graduating in 1965 before heading to college, but life hit hard when his father became seriously ill with cardiovascular disease, leading Don to leave school and spend more time with him. During that painful chapter, music became his escape. He had already joined his first group, the Four Speeds, and it gave him something solid to hold on to. Richard Bowden, a longtime friend from Don's younger years, brought him into a new opportunity when his father started putting together a Dixieland jazz band. Don came in as a founding member, and before long the group changed its name to Felicity. They signed with a local producer and released one of their first songs, Horton, written by Don. It was a small start, but the ambition was huge.
I started writing when I was about 17, I guess. Some really horrible, horrible stuff. Unfortunately, some of it is still preserved on records that are hopefully safely locked somewhere in somebody's closet.
Then came what felt like fate stepping in. Don and his bandmates crossed paths with the already established Kenny Rogers. Being fellow Texans, there was an instant connection, and Kenny saw something special in these young musicians. After another name change to Shiloh, the group let Rogers help guide them, and soon they landed a deal with Amos Records. It was the beginning of something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. But this brought another massive turning point, moving to Los Angeles. That move changed everything. In those first rough months, they might have been sleeping on the streets if Kenny Rogers hadn't opened his doors and let them stay with him. Even through all the lineup changes, members coming and going, Don and Richard Bowden stayed at the core of it all. But behind the music, tension was building. Don and Richard started clashing more and more over the future of the group, each with a different vision and each wanting control. The arguments kept getting worse until Shiloh finally broke apart for good in 1971. It was a breakup.
How did you survive school? Were you a good kid?
I was a good kid and a bad kid. You know, I was a good student, but I was also kind of wild. But what really got me through high school and changed my life, I think, was the Beatles. When they came along, I really knew what it was I wanted to do. I didn't even consider doing anything else. I would listen to records every morning before I went to school, just so I could get through the day, you know. Because I was one of those kids that, as musicians and actors and performers of all kinds typically are, that felt like a misfit in high school. You know, I was never on the student council, and I was never elected, you know, to any of those silly offices and positions, you know, that you're elected to when you're in high school.
But it also opened a door Don never saw coming. Now in Los Angeles, and already tied into the record scene, Don started crossing paths with other hungry musicians trying to make it big. One of them was Glenn Frey, who had also signed with Amos Records. The two got closer when they became backup players for Linda Ronstadt during her 1971 tour, and that's when something powerful started clicking. But it wasn't just Don and Glenn. In Linda Ronstadt's backing band were Bernie Leadon and Randy Meisner, and when the four played together, there was an undeniable chemistry. It felt natural, almost electric. Before long, they made a bold move, breaking away to form their own band, the Eagles. Formed in 1971, the Eagles exploded fast. They signed with Asylum Records and dropped their self-titled debut the very next year. For a first album, it hit hard and made noise right away. The talent in that group was unreal, and Don was stepping into a songwriting partnership that would help build one of the biggest bands in rock history. Don's songwriting partnership with Glenn Frey really started heating up on the Eagles' second studio album. The band's early sound leaned heavily into country rock, and it brought them praise and growing fame. But Don and Glenn weren't interested in staying comfortable. They wanted something bigger, louder, and harder. For their third album, On the Border, they pushed toward a harder rock sound, and that move shook things up inside the band. Not everyone was on board.
To find a place to fit in, to belong to something, to have an outlet. It's trying to communicate with people and trying to belong, even though maybe some people claim they don't want to belong, but everybody wants to belong to some club. Whether it's the whole human race or a club of musicians or actors or painters, and it's an attempt to communicate, basically, which could be translated into girls and money.
Bernie Leadon strongly disagreed with the new direction and had already been frustrated over having less creative input. For a while, he kept those feelings bottled up while the band pushed through albums 3 and 4, but all that tension exploded in 1975 during a heated meeting over what the next record should sound like. As Glenn passionately laid out his vision, Bernie finally snapped. He cut him off, told him to chill out, and dumped a drink right on his head. It was a shocking moment that sent a message loud and clear. That one outburst practically sealed Bernie's exit, and not long after, the Eagles announced his departure. The cracks in the band were getting harder to hide. Don and the remaining members moved fast to fill the gap, bringing in their longtime friend, guitarist Joe Walsh. Alongside the other key addition, Don Felder, the band suddenly had a dangerous new energy. With this lineup, the Eagles were about to create something legendary, co-writing what would become their most iconic song of all time, a track that would change everything. Don once again took lead vocals as the Eagles recorded Hotel California, releasing it on their 1976 album of the same name, and what happened next was explosive.
The big deal happened for the Eagles the first time. It was wonderful. I mean, it was what I'd always wanted. It's what I'd lived my whole life for. But you're never prepared for it, really. I mean, it scares the hell out of people. Different people in the band handled it in different ways. There's a strange thing that happens when you get what you want,
Yeah.
or what you think you want. Some people go into this very self-destructive mode and try to ruin everything, either consciously or subconsciously. I've seen it happen a million times, because success for some people, for a lot of people, is more difficult to deal with than failure.
Hotel California became an instant classic, shot up the charts, and took America by storm. It wasn't just a hit song, it became a phenomenon. But while success was soaring, tension inside the band was growing fast. By the next decade, personal relationships were starting to crack, especially between Don Felder and the rest of the group. Felder felt increasingly underappreciated, and much of that bitterness was aimed at Glenn Frey. What had been simmering behind the scenes finally boiled over on July 31st, 1980. During a concert in Long Beach, the hostility was impossible to hide. Through the whole show, Felder and Frey were reportedly threatening to fight once they got off stage. The crowd may have heard the music, but backstage there was chaos brewing. Even though the feud centered on those two, that night pushed the whole band toward collapse. It was the breaking point. The Eagles still honored a commitment to record a live album, but the damage was done. Glenn Frey reportedly refused to speak to the other members, including Don, and before long it was obvious the Eagles were finished. One of rock's biggest bands had come apart in dramatic fashion. But Don wasn't about to disappear from the spotlight. He moved into a solo career with serious momentum, and one major boost came when he reunited with Stevie Nicks. Together they recorded her 1981 song, Leather and Lace, and it quickly became a top 10 hit, proving Don was far from done. Right away, Don proved why he had been such a powerhouse in the Eagles. His songwriting talent was undeniable, and now he had full creative control to do things his way. He exploded as a solo artist. Even though his debut album had a modest response, his single Dirty Laundry became a massive success, selling over 1 million copies in America and putting everyone on notice. Then came his second album in 1984, Building the Perfect Beast, and Don took things to another level. The album featured one of his most iconic songs, The Boys of Summer, and it climbed all the way to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. That track became more than a hit.
Immediately when we started having the success that we had, people started pushing the self-destruct button, And those of us who were less self-destructive than others were trying to keep the boat afloat. And we managed to keep it afloat for about 8.5 years by hook or crook, but it eventually sank. And I really wasn't prepared emotionally for it when it did end.
It became a defining anthem of the era. At the same time, Don's personal life seemed to be moving toward something serious. When he started a relationship with actress Maren Jensen in the early 1980s, he believed he had found something lasting. He proposed, she said yes, and it looked like wedding bells were ahead. Their bond ran deep. Jensen even sang harmony on his 1982 song, Johnny Can't Read. And Don dedicated the album featuring I Can't Stand Still to his fiancée. It was personal, emotional, and deeply tied to that chapter of his life. But the romance didn't make it to the altar. After 4 years together, they split, ending what had seemed like his most serious relationship up to that point. And soon, another battle was waiting. In 1993, Don tried to end his contract with Geffen Records, but the label claimed he still owed a greatest hits collection and 2 more studio albums. What followed became a major fight over musicians' rights, and Don was ready for that showdown. Around 50 years earlier, a California law had been created to protect actors from getting trapped in endless contracts, but that law covered entertainers as a whole. And Don argued it applied to him too. Under the statute, no company could force an entertainer to stay tied to them for more than 7 years. It was a bold legal weapon, and Don was ready to use it. But Geffen Records wasn't backing down easily. According to Don's claims, David Geffen had made secret arrangements with other labels to keep them from signing him. It was a shocking accusation and gave Don the grounds he needed to fire back with a countersuit. What started as a contract dispute was turning into a major battle over control and artist freedom. Don's drive to make a difference didn't stop with the music business either. His passion pushed beyond the industry and into environmental activism. In 1990, he helped establish the Walden Woods Project, determined to protect the historic land from modern development. This wasn't just a side cause, it meant something deeply personal to him, and that wasn't the only place he fought to protect. He also turned attention to another threatened area close to his heart, the wetlands around Caddo Lake in Texas, where he had spent part of his childhood. By helping establish the Caddo Lake Institute, he worked to make sure those lands would endure for generations. It showed another side of Don that many people never expected. Still, for all his solo success, there was one thing that never fully left him. A part of Don always seemed to wish the Eagles could keep going as the band they once were. Even after all the drama, that connection still lingered. In 1994, Don and the other members agreed to let old grudges go and officially reunited as the Eagles, and fans went wild. After years of drama and breakup rumors, the legendary band was back together. It was a huge comeback that many thought would never happen. Around the same time, Don was building something important in his personal life too. After being with model Sharon Summerall for some time, he took the plunge and married her in 1995. Together they would have 3 children, and Don stayed deeply committed to their marriage through every challenge. When Sharon was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, he stood by her side.
And being the front guy, because I was always in the back, back safely behind the drums. And I'm still not your leaping leotard, I mean, if you want to see a lot of prancing and dancing around and strutting and hair shaking and stuff, then I'm not the man to see.
Showing a loyal side of himself many people rarely saw. Even with this new chapter, Don never stopped fighting for artists who felt powerless. His battle with Geffen Records had convinced him that musicians needed protection from unfair deals and industry games. That led him to help establish the Recording Artists Coalition in 2000, pushing to defend performers from dishonest treatment and giving artists a stronger voice. It was another fight he took seriously. Meanwhile, the Eagles had returned to touring and recording, proving the band still had life left in it. Even after another heartbreaking pause following Glenn Frey's death in 2016, they found a way forward. The loss left a huge gap. But when the band returned the next year, Glenn's son Deacon stepped in to honor his father's place on stage. It was an emotional passing of the torch. Then another special moment came, when Don brought his own son, Will, on tour to play guitar with the band. It was more than a performance, it felt like legacy unfolding right in front of the audience. Don had spoken out on major industry issues for years as a representative of the Recording Artists Coalition, but in 2020, the pressure rose to a whole new level when he appeared before the U.S. Congress. Sitting down to testify about copyright law, Don focused on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, arguing it did not go far enough and that stronger protections were needed for artists in the digital age. It was a high-stakes fight over the future of music rights, but this battle was far more complicated than some of his earlier ones. Don did not have universal support, with some critics pointing to his aggressive history around online copyright enforcement. It had become common for creators using his music to face copyright claims, even in cases some believed involved fair use, like guitar tutorials. That made the debate around his position far more controversial. By the end of 2023, Don remained the only original Eagles member still in the lineup. Now in his 70s, he and the band understood an era was coming to a close, and they launched their farewell run, calling it the Long Goodbye Tour. It felt like the closing chapter of a legendary story, but even after decades of fame, one disturbing incident from long ago has continued to cast a shadow. Not long after the Eagles first broke up, Don was reportedly struggling with heavy drinking and personal turmoil. Then came the events of November 21st, 1980, when paramedics responded to his home. Reports from that night described a deeply troubling scene involving two underage individuals and alleged substance use. An incident that sparked major scrutiny and remained one of the most controversial moments linked to his life. The story took a dark turn that people still talk about. The 16-year-old reportedly overdosed that night, but thankfully she survived. Don came through the legal fallout with probation and a fine after pleading to charges related to contributing to the delinquency of a minor. But while the case seemed settled in 1980, that night did not simply fade away. It would continue following him for decades. And remarkably, as recently as 2024, the events of November 21st were brought back into public discussion during a separate trial involving allegations tied to song lyrics. A completely different legal battle suddenly reopened questions about one of the darkest episodes connected to his name. The past came rushing back in a dramatic way.
I used to worry about that a lot, but I don't worry about it anymore because it always comes back.
What is that feeling when you used to worry about it? Is it a feeling of panic?
Yeah, it's a slight feeling of panic, but that just makes it worse, you know. I have found that if I'm patient and that if you nurture your life, if you keep trying to grow and do other things, then you'll be fine.
Over the years, Don has spoken only briefly about what happened, trying to give his version of events. But some of those explanations raised even more questions. In 1991, he claimed he had been hosting a farewell gathering for the band's road crew that night. But later details seemed to complicate that story. According to a letter that surfaced in the 2024 proceedings, a party may have been the last thing on his mind. In that letter, he reportedly wrote that he did not want to see friends and was struggling deeply after the Eagles' breakup. In testimony, he described being caught in grief and trying to escape depression during that period. It painted a far darker emotional picture than earlier explanations had suggested. According to accounts discussed around the case, he eventually contacted an escort service and arranged for a girl to come to his home. That decision would lead into a chain of events that became one of the most scrutinized and controversial nights of his life. The night continued in a reckless blur, with drinking and drug use reportedly going on, until everything suddenly took a terrifying turn. The situation became critical when the girl collapsed and began seizing, turning what had been a chaotic night into a full emergency. By the time first responders arrived, her condition had reportedly improved, but the scene was already under serious scrutiny. According to Don, it was only during the paramedics' questioning that he learned she was 16 years old, a claim that has remained heavily discussed ever since. Adding to his testimony, Don also maintained that he had not slept with the girl. But no matter how the events were explained, that night became one of the most controversial episodes tied to his life and legacy. And yet, despite scandals, feuds, breakups, and personal battles, Don Henley's impact on music is impossible to deny. The Eagles are still spoken of as one of the greatest rock bands in history, and Don's songwriting, voice, and vision were at the center of that rise. He proved he had the talent not only to help power a legendary band, but to build a massive solo career as well. What a story. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves music history and wild untold stories. And drop a comment below.